Market Sam after work. Today I've got this day started with us going out to do a long range shoot. We were going to take out our 300 rum and a couple of different rounds, which were the 220 grain burger projectile compared to the 245 grain burger projectile. Both set up, different powders for different reasons, but set up to run at their maximum safe pressure and see how they went. But this is what the morning looked like. So heavy mirage, and I can go through and explain the mirage. It was very, very still, very unusual, quite an unusual morning for us. That was just after 5 a.m. It is a stinking hot time of year. We've sort of got 45 degrees today we're expecting, so I don't know what that is exactly, roughly 110, 113 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's a stinker of a day. Wasn't that hot this morning, it was around the 75 degrees Fahrenheit, so I think that's about 25 degrees Celsius is what we were sitting in, but that's what the mirage looked like. So can't do anything when you got a mirage like that, not out at the 3,000 meters anyway, but that's when I was going to do the comparison. And I'll get into more about this comparison, but what it left to me was the thought of doing a video to fill up that gap. I don't have that content because there's no point trying to shoot in that sort of condition. I can't catch the footage, let alone measure a group and things, which is what I was after to see how it went. But was to explain a little bit about my loading technique. And I've sort of explained bits about it before. And we do, from what we gather at least, quite different to what most people do. We don't do ladder testing. We don't bother too much with seating depth. We don't run basically any form of trying to fit into the nodes for harmonics. We don't run barrel tuners. There's lots of things we don't do. I don't largely bother with ESs. I tend to find good ones when I measure it to show you guys. I tend to find, my speed is very consistent. I do, as I've said multiple times, I'll set up to pressure. I'll try and get up near the top end of it and then make everything work from there, which is basically I got to shoot properly and I've set up the rifle properly. It's not too much more complicated. The other obvious details which are always there is I use the best brass that I can find within reason. I use good bullets all the time, largely burger bullets. I use good primers all the time, largely federal primers in the gold medal version. And I use ADI powders, which are very temperature stable and also moderately easy for us to get. Beyond that point, I size, I deburr the flash holes, I size appropriately, I make sure my neck thickness is about consistent, around the 14 to 15 thou in my neck thickness and their central. I don't fuss too much about unless I've got an issue, and the main thing I'm going for there is that when I push the bullet in on the press, is that there's not too much pressure. It's a fairly nice gentle fit in there, which is very much, I don't use a gauge to measure that. It is just a very nice load. I'm not pushing it at all. I'm not marking the projectile at all. And I end up with a nice sort of feel as it goes together. And a consistent feel. That's largely my loading, which I've been through several times. But there's another detail which I think is probably just as or even more so important. And I suppose the caveat would go with this is don't just listen to this little bit and just do this. Listen to it properly and I'll explain it properly. What I largely do is fill the case up with powder. Yeah, so don't just take yours and fill it up with powder and see what happens. If you've got the wrong powder, you can blow your rifle up. Really, truly, put the wrong powder and too much into it, you can do that if you simply fill it up. I find a powder that works. I find a powder and a speed a powder that has a burn rate that means that I can get the maximum of that powder in there and not over pressure, within reason, there's the little point in there, and not over pressure, because I'm also larging generally larger bullets, so longer bullets or heavier bullets, because I want the very good BCs. I'm generally trying to get the up there in the top end of the performance out of the cartridge, and generally, especially in the big stuff, I tend to be running a little longer barrel. So a slightly slower burning powder, but then it depends, there's a balance. It's not just go to the slowest powder, you'll do that sometimes and you'll lose speed. So there's a little bit of testing I do there. I'll largely read, but a little bit of testing I'll do there. But by doing that, I'll run from a not quite compressed, but completely full, up to moderately compressed, where there's a little crunch as you put it in there. Now this is all relevant. You don't want to get to the point where you're marking the projectiles with your seating die. You don't want to get to, with light neck tension, you put too much, the bullet will push back out. So it is getting up there, and it is very relevant, and it's where I do my testing. It's why my one bit of load development is when I'm first setting up cartridge. I'll do the working out. Largely I've worked out a powder already. Sometimes I have to work that out and test different ones. And then I'll do 4 or 5 or 6 different, just one shot, just one load, and do that whether it's a 1 grain different between them or it's 2 grain different between them, and then take them out. Run them in the early days. I would just run them to see what the pressure was. Nowadays, with good little chronographs like the bullet seeker, or I've forgotten its new name, but whack it on there, and then I'll get a speed as well. But what I'm looking for is my indent on the primer and case and bolt lift and all those things. And I find something that's happy, and I go out and shoot that, and that's what you see. A lot of people would say, how can you do that? You haven't done your ESs, you haven't done this, you haven't done your seating depths, you haven't done your ladder testing to get the right node, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I don't do any of that. And yet you see groups out there. I see groups quite regularly in the 1 MOA or 1.5 MOA at ELR, at 2,000 meters, 3,000 yards, 3,000 meters, even at a mile. We see that where the wind has more influence than that. So we see very good details out, very good groups out of it, and when I measure, very good ESs out of it. Now, this is my situation. I'll get into what other choices you've got when you're not trying to run that level of performance. But the logic that goes with it is that it's like cylinder fill, like we're like getting, I suppose there's 2 things go to it. If you fill it up with powder, then how the powder sits in the case when it's about to be fired, whether there's a shallow in the top or a shallow in the front or a little dip in the bottom, or it's just light. It generally would be lighter on the bottom of the cartridge, but it depends. Powder does stick together. So once you've got an air gap in there, then you move how that burn rate can happen through that cartridge. So, and this also is going to be different to whether it's stored for a long time or for a short time, and all sorts of other bits and pieces because of the nature of powder inside there. By filling it up, you make it so that there is no choice. It has to be this. It is full. This is how it is. That there's no room for where there air gap or for where there's more powder here or less powder here. You make that consistent. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the more you put in there, a small percentage of difference in your powder. So let's say you're using, like I do, a Charge Master, or where we could have up to, I think it's nearly, they measure them and talk up nearly 2/10 of a grain, can be different in that is the sort of range that they will measure in. Even if you've got your numbers right, about 2/10 of a grain. Now 2/10 of a grain when it comes to 40 grains is more of a difference than 2/10 of a grain when it comes to 52 grains. Yes, so there is a point where you load back, and obviously that's a big difference in your powder, but when you load back down, you make that same discrepancy, a larger discrepancy by percentage, because you're working with a lesser total amount. I hope that makes sense. So you put those 2 things together. The fill can't, the distribution of powder can't be different, has to be everywhere. Plus you're running a little more than you in your powder side of things, then that discrepancy difference has to be a less percentage. So you'd end up with a more even bang happening out of it. That's one of the things that I think is a true piece of where some of the accuracy I find comes from, is that I am doing that. But there's another detail to do this. And of course, I'll reiterate there before I go to the next detail, is that flies in the face of doing your ladder test to find out exactly where you're getting the best groups and the best ESs and that sort of stuff, from doing your bullet seating to exactly the same sort of thing, to barrel tuners, to even barrel lengths, all the bits and pieces and all the stuff that can go into the massive effort, let alone the F-class level of the amount of machining they do to the setting up the bullets and tipping the bullets and all that sort of stuff to make them completely consistent, to all the stuff they do with the brass and all the different wonderful tools you can get to do that sort of thing. And I don't want to take anything away from what they do, But I've tended to, and especially with doing lots of it, I've tended to simplify that as much as possible. I only do what I need. It doesn't mean I don't neck turn, doesn't mean I don't have to even things up, doesn't mean I don't have to do any of those particular individual jobs, but I only do them if I have a problem with the brass. I've never done them in having a problem for the actual group that I see out of them. So the other bit I want to get onto is that the other place that I do a very similar thing is in some of the, like the 45-70 at the range, or the 45 long Colt for the handgun, or 45 Colt, whichever side of the fence you come from. Is that in some of those, when I'm loading them right back down, with the powders I'm running at least, I can't fill the case up. I can't get a full case. And I've certainly seen people at the range with handguns that will have a normal sort of bang, and then a loud bang, and then a click, and that sort of stuff. And really, it's not the fact that they've loaded inconsistently, it's the fact that they're only running such a small amount of powder in a large case. And this can also be referenced to the fact that you want to load back, you've got a 6.5 Creedmoor, or a 30-06, or a 300 Win Mag, or whatever it is, and you don't really want the recoil, you just want to plink with it, so you want to bring your powder level a long way down. Now there's powders like Trail Boss and things like that, which go largely about a lot of fill with not much bang, and that might be the answer in that case. But in the way of running the powder you want to run and getting everything else, and you want to do your ladder testing, and you want to do all the other bits and pieces, but you want to try and make that work. I haven't done that, but I have done it in some of the straight wall cases, is that I'll pack the case. So I'll put the amount of powder I want in, and then I'll pack stuff on top of it before I put the bullet in. I end up with that exact same thing. I don't end up with a full case, so I don't get around that percentage discrepancy, but I do get around where the powder sits, simply by packing stuff, inert stuff on the top there, and then putting the bullet in. So then I end up with a slightly compressed load once again, but it's holding the powder in exactly the right place. So that I have used and has worked nicely there. I have not tested, so it goes with a caveat of see how it goes. But I would be almost certain, simply through the engineering logic of it, that that will help some of these people who are running a 2/3 or a 3/4 case fill, and everything else is working fine for them, but they don't find that quite consistency, whether they're doing ESs or whether they're doing groups at longer range, that sort of stuff. If you packed it, then have that powder all held against the primer and all very consistent, then that, from all I've seen, is going to make improvements. What do you pack it with? When I pack things, listen, there is proper little cork things to go in there. You can do that sort of stuff. What I've used is the same what I did when I was fireforming in the Gibbs, is toilet paper. Get a sheet of toilet paper, just one single sheet, and fold it up, or cut it in half, whatever it is, and fold it up, and then push it in with a little blunt bit of a toothpick or that type of thing, and then push it all in, and then it has some squish to it, but that's going to work fine. Then you put that in there, and then put the bullet in over the top of it. I think you can use the likes of cotton wool. There's, I think it was, I forgot what it's called. There was corn wheat or some sort of wheat they used to use, the likes of the more inert sort of things, the likes of the cotton wool or something similar to that, the likes of a dressing with the just non-inert sort of stuff in there. I've used tissue paper or toilet paper. Toilet paper is what I used, folded up into little squares and then tucked it in there is what I did, and that worked fine. So the two caveats that would go with that loading tip are: do not just fill up your case with any old powder or the powder you've been using and just run a lot more and see what happens. That is going to break something or hurt you or worse. So do not do that. But if you want to run that powder load, if you want to fill it up, then you've got to do all your research on a slower powder to see what you can get on that sort of stuff. The simple thing, if you've already got a load that works fine, everything else is good, but you've got a certain amount of space in there, try a bit of tissue paper, fold it up, get it in there, put the bullet in on top, that holds everything in the right place, and then go and test and see what sort of improvements are made. I'd like to see some feedback on that. It's not something I've done, largely because I don't run loads like that. I run a fill, that's what I've always done. It goes with the heavy bullets, it goes with the powder choices, all that sort of stuff. But I also, with every new load, I always test, and I always make sure I go below my load and build up to my load. I'll build up to where I think it should be and then go past where it should be, and then I run. Then I fire one and check it, and sometimes the first one will be, oh, that's as hot as I need to go. I've got my maths wrong. Sometimes I'll get all the way to the top and okay, listen, that's still okay. I could maybe run another 1 or 2 grains of powder. Sometimes you find you haven't got the speed you want, so then you've got to change to a slightly faster powder and do the whole process again. But for those people who've got the load or want to run a lower load, they don't want all that speed, or in the world of the blackouts and subsonic and that sort of stuff, then to be able to run something to pack it up, I think you're going to find a lot more consistency out of the simple logic of where the powder is, how consistent it is from one shot to the other shot. I think it'll help. So I'd like to see what you find out. Anyway, that's that one for today. We'll get out and do the test with these rounds and see what's going on. They're interesting for a fair bit faster, lighter bullet and a little bit slower but very good BC bullet. It looks like the maths they're exactly the same place at 3,000 yards, right out to 3,000 meters. I was going to do a test at 3,000 meters and verify that, but I also wanted to see what was going to happen. The slightly lower, faster one's going to have a little less recoil. The big one deals with the wind a little better, but it's traveling slowly to start off with. So it's going to be interesting to see if I could compare groups. You know, maybe one could get on steel once and one could get on steel twice. Don't know. It was just a little bit of something interesting to put together to take the 300 rum out for another burn. Anyway guys, thank you very much for checking in. We'll catch you next time.